So on Friday the 21st of July, I, like many others, took part in the Barbenheimer craze, which if you've been living under a rock just means I went to see both Oppenheimer and Barbie, me specifically in that order, on their paired opening day. And it was like, maybe the best cinema experience I've had in, I don't know, a decade? So let's talk about that. Barbenheimer as a concept is basically a meme. A couple of people pointed out the inherent humour of two major releases, both so seemingly polar opposite in concept and execution, coming out on the same day, and the internet did its thing and went nuts with it. Unofficial t-shirts, artwork, the cast of each film getting asked about it in interviews. The mere concept of Barbenheimer was a genuine phenomenon. But like, so what, right? We've memed the shit out of movies before. We memed Morbius so hard we actually managed to trick Sony into re-releasing it after it first flopped, only for it to flop again. Which was hilarious, by the way. Thank you to all involved in that one. So like, what's even noteworthy about Barbenheimer? Like, so what? Well, the difference this time is the culture around the whole phenomenon went beyond just jokes on the internet. It translated to actual interest and engagement with these films, and while a cynical take on Barbenheimer might just be to say, congratulations, you were fooled into doing free marketing for multi-million-dollar studio releases. But listen, Barbenheimer isn't just a bunch of people going to see these movies because a funny TikTok told them to. I think the reason this whole thing picked up steam is based around a lot more than lol, this one's pink and this one's black and they are different colours. You see, we've had major studio efforts with contradictory tones come out on the same day before. Casino and Toy Story weren't exactly cut from the same cloth, nor were Die Hard and A Fish Called Wanda. Maybe the closest we've ever got to Barbenheimer was when The Dark Knight and Mamma Mia came out on the same day. The former ironically being another instance where half of the competing opening efforts was directed by Christopher Nolan. Guess he just has a thing about putting out dark, gritty movies against light, fluffy, female-led efforts with musical numbers. Maybe he's like a really super big fan of the time when McDonald's used to ask if you wanted a boy's toy or a girl's toy with your Happy Meal, and the boy's toy would be like Hot Wheels, Adventure Time, or Transformers, and the girl's toy would always be... something pink. What the f*** is a Paul Frank? Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Even taking into account the Batman/ABBA punch-up, we still haven't really ever had anything before like Barbenheimer. Because these films are more than just oppositional on a superficial level. Like, oh, this one's a comedy and this one's super serious. They are literally oppositional in every single way, but specifically at both a crazy high level of like two totally different filmmakers with such polar opposite visions fully realizing what they set out to do. Like, yeah, Barbie's pink and Oppenheimer has scenes that don't even have colour. But it doesn't just stop there. Oppenheimer is based on fact, Barbie on fiction. Oppenheimer is tragic and solemn, Barbie is funny and uplifting. Oppenheimer is significantly male-led with a supporting female cast, Barbie is the inverse. Oppenheimer features frontal nudity, Barbie has many characters who don't even know what sex is. Oppenheimer is non-linear, Barbie is linear. Where Oppenheimer philosophizes on one of the most devastating acts of violence in human history, Barbie's violent conflict takes on the form of a dance-off. One was directed by one of the most significant and celebrated male directors at the height of his game, one was directed by one of the most significant and celebrated women directors at the height of hers. One has audible dialogue tracks, the other was made by Christopher Nolan. Seriously, dude, what is it with you and mumbling dialogue audio levels? Turn that shit up, my god. Jokes aside, it cannot be taken for granted just how unbelievably dissimilar these two films are. The elements I've just pointed out are by no means a comprehensive list or analysis. It's not just important that they are different though. If the key to cinema success now was just for two major releases to launch on the same day while being completely oppositional to one another, then we'd all be bracing ourselves for Saw Patrol to totally sweep the world into a ticket-buying frenzy on October 13th, as cinemagoers rush to witness characters suffer through panic attacks from the tense life-or-death situations they find themselves in before calming themselves down and relaxing with the Jigsaw Killer. Nah, for real though, the dog has a panic attack in the first Paw Patrol movie? That film was wild, man. But yeah, for some reason, while I'm sure both of those films will do incredibly well, I don't think Saw Patrol is going to have quite the same impact as Barbenheimer. And the difference here is that Barbie and Oppenheimer aren't just tonally dissimilar and catering to hugely different audiences, they're also both fantastic. No shade to Saw and Paw Patrol, by the way. As a horror guy, I'll definitely be watching and very possibly enjoying the new Saw, and Paw Patrol will also be fantastic to the right audience. But there's a difference in being fantastic for a specific audience and just being fantastic. And I don't even necessarily mean here that I like these films, although coincidentally I very much did. I mean that they're great in ways that even a general mainstream audience can really gravitate to. You know how many dads are going to describe Oppenheimer as a proper film during its cinema run? You know how many Barbie watch parties are going to go dressed up in big groups? Lots of them. And then those same people, a lot of them, are probably going to check out the other film because of the opposite audience's buzz about them. If we think of these films in terms of who would go to see them as a Venn diagram, the audiences for Saw and Paw Patrol 2 are two completely separate circles, with only the teeny bit of crossover being horror fans with young kids and weird obsessive freaks like me who really have no excuse but for some reason are in there anyway. What's weird though is when we do the same for Barbie and Oppenheimer, even though the two circles are totally different targets, that crossover is a lot bigger because 1, the meme, but I'd say more importantly 2, they're just both interesting and unique films that anyone who's in the movies is going to want to see. And that's not just me hypothesizing from my own personal stance. That's just outright true. The numbers coming out from cinema chains saying how many double bill tickets they sold before either film was even out for two films that, technically speaking, aren't actually in any way remotely connected is unprecedented. And that might not seem like a huge deal, but I actually really think it is. Especially when you consider that these films are not general audience movies in the same way a big Marvel event movie is. I mean, yeah, they absolutely have mass appeal. One look at the box office numbers will tell you that. But they're not like calculated to be as populous as possible. They are studio effort, sure, but not in the traditional means-tested, studio-engineered, strictly formulaic manner a release of this scale would usually aim to be. They seemingly haven't tried to soften the edges of the storytelling and perspectives their unique directors bring to the table, and instead have really rolled into those unique qualities as selling points. Barbie doesn't tone down its kitschiness and campiness out of fear of being too much for the average cinema goer. The film looks like how ice cream with sprinkles tastes and makes no apologies for it. It's super saturated, artificial, sugary glitter that has more visual commonality with a drag performance at a circus than does with most mass movies. And I mean that entirely as a compliment. And on the other hand, Oppenheimer is an unashamed slow burner. Reflective, quiet, deliberate. The large climactic occurrence the film builds up to doesn't even go off with an incredibly bombastic boom, but a quiet, contemplative silence. Two of the bombs, which I know it's crass to describe as the main event of the film considering the history they carry, but realistically speaking they are the climactic action of the movie, don't even occur on screen, instead being explored through metaphorical and abstract imagery. Sure, both are directed by big-name directors, one already absolutely massive and one who prior to this was very significant and respected in filmmaking circles and with this most recent film has become an absolute household name. Sure, they're both based on things audiences recognize, which always helps, but like even taking that into account, I cannot stress enough how incredibly good for movies it is that these two films that are vision driven, that aren't based on an existing movie franchise, though I'm sure that will shortly change with Barbie, and that wouldn't on paper even necessarily scream huge mass appeal, are two of the biggest titles and biggest cultural moments in film this year. And it's because of this that while I'm aware that this video has kind of a hyperbolic title, I also kind of mean it. In an age where cinema still hasn't really bounced back from COVID, as streaming kind of took the ball and ran with it, and so many companies are closing the gap between a cinema release and its digital release so they can further push year-long subscriptions to attain some growth in this blossoming market, I think this might be the first time cinema has felt like a huge deal again. These films are fighting off massive, safe bet mega franchises on far less cinematically established ideas. Oppenheimer had a higher opening weekend than Fast and Furious 10 and John Wick 4. Oppenheimer, a slow, moody biopic, bigger opening than John Wick 4. Barbie had a higher opening than Spider-Verse and Guardians 3. I couldn't have imagined that happening a few years back, and yet here we are, two new, unique titles with no previously established theatrical release franchises to hang on to, absolutely dominating the opening weekend charts and box office numbers in general. In fact, if you look further at opening weekends, other than Super Mario, which, if you really want to be pedantic about it, technically did have a theatrical release prior to this year's animated movie, there is nothing in the top 10 besides Barbie and Oppenheimer in there that are not already part of a massive franchise. It's hard to say where they'll end up too, because they've still got long runs ahead of them. Could Oppenheimer out box office the latest Mission Impossible movie? Maybe. It's looking pretty close right now. What is happening? I'll tell you what's happening. While films like The Flash and even Indiana Jones 5 are absolutely bombing due to overinflated budgets and the artificial stench of corporate mass appeal market focus, while superhero fatigue continues to churn on through oversaturation, causing audiences to pass on films like Shazam 2 and Quantumania, well, people are just waiting for streaming releases because there's all these films out there that they maybe want to check out, but not enough to actively make an effort to go somewhere to see. You know, your Elementals, your Renfields, the films that make you go, I'd watch that, but I'm not buying a ticket. Barbie and Oppenheimer are giving people reason to be excited to go to the cinema again. They are event movies, just not the kind we normally associate with being event movies in this day and age. Because here's the thing, I can go on about box office numbers as much as I want. That's not even what I care about. In fact, personally, I don't care about that at all. I actually think it's a little crass to measure the success of art purely by the financial gains it makes. I just use them here to easily articulate that other people seem to be feeling about these films to at least some extent the same way I do, as they are clearly showing up for them. What I care about, if we look all the way back to my opening sentiment of this video, is that I saw Oppenheimer and Barbie, two wildly different, wildly unique, wildly vision-driven films on the same opening day, and it was phenomenal. If you'll allow me to indulge in a little bit of pretentiousness here, when I point out how different these films are, I'm kind of burying the lead a little. Because what really matters to me isn't just that they're at odds with one another. What matters is that they're at odds on the extreme ends of the emotional spectrum. I personally saw Oppenheimer first and the Barbie movie second, though I do think the inverse order is probably equally as compelling a viewing experience. I just wanted something to bring me back up after something that was almost inevitably going to bring me down. And what I found really incredible about the experience, as someone who just loves movies and the artistic medium and stories in general to the point that my creative output, life and career always loops back around to be about them, is these two films back to back represent completely opposite ends of the emotional spectrum of how this incredible art form can make us feel. These films represent the wide gamut of experiences a human being can have when they just sit in a dark room with some other people and lose themselves in a story. Are they perfect? I don't think so. I think both are great films and fantastic achievements, but if you want my quick individual reviews of each of them, I'd say that I appreciate Oppenheimer not taking the lazy but easily digestible narrative positioning of Oppenheimer was incredible and the bombs, while awful, were a necessary evil, and instead engaging in a far more complex and nuanced way with its subject matter, not hero-worshipping Oppenheimer, but navigating elements of his character that were morally reprehensible, childishly naive, or arguably self-martyring and self-aggrandizing. I found it interesting that while it engaged with his famously poetic manner of speaking post-bombing, it also picked this apart through the eyes of other characters as self-pitying, pointed out the hypocrisies of his seemingly flip-flopping beliefs in informing his actions, and acknowledged some erratic behavior, and the whole movie was held together by incredible direction, performances, tension, cinematography, and sound design, excluding the dialogue, which could have been turned up a touch. But on the other hand, I think it failed its female characters, who historically are far more interesting than the Oppenheimer side interests the film relegates them to being. Some choices also felt bafflingly weird, like having Oppenheimer recite the Bhagavad Gita quote he's famously known for saying during a sex scene? What? I didn't get that choice at all. Also, I think the film's biggest failing is that while it philosophizes on the human impact of the atomic bomb, it also fails to engage for even a second with any of the human lives who would be affected by it. We don't see a single Japanese face or even either of the cities of Hiroshima or Nagasaki this whole movie. And although I do think that could be a commentary on the impersonal nature with which this devastating decision was made, there is a really great line after all where a decision maker elects not to destroy Kyoto because he and his wife honeymoon there. I do also think it's a strange decision to have our sympathies and sense of tragedy for the lives affected by this bomb to be almost solely directed around the man who invented it. That said, I will acknowledge this is a difficult thing to navigate. You most certainly don't want to make tragedy torture porn and just show montages of Japanese people dying in horrible circumstances as an outsider. Leave that to something like the semi-autobiographical Barefoot Gen, but I do think there was probably some compromise to be made here in at least acknowledging the presence of the humanity that was lost in this event rather than alluding to them as this abstract off-frame existence. The film, however, is still a harrowing experience worth engaging with and an almost undeniably accomplished piece of filmmaking, even if I don't necessarily agree with all of its narrative decisions. Barbie? Also not perfect. I had an absolute blast with the film and thought Ryan Gosling's Ken was one of the funniest comedic characters ever put to screen. The film's sickly colour palette could have been overbearing, but proved to be one of its greatest strengths in how much identity it gave the whole movie. And for what was marketed as the silly fun film of the day, I actually found it to have a surprisingly emotional punch with strong messaging for both men and women that I actually think goes far beyond the surface level criticisms I've seen thrown out of girl power or anti-man. The way the film handled gender roles and politics, while unsubtle at times, managed to do so in such a way as to always be entertaining and fun, while still making interesting points that felt emotionally true to the characters and our shared reality. It also has some of my favourite set pieces in a film this decade, with the musical number and dance fight being both hilarious, visually arresting, and, once again, surprisingly emotional. And some of the meta commentary was genuinely smart and creative. A particular highlight was the way the motif of the way children play with toys kept coming up throughout the film, and often in new and unexpected ways. One thing that didn't work for me though, and this is arguably less of a problem of the Barbie movie and more of a problem with art in general under certain brands, is that it did that thing where Mattel let the writing criticize their decisions. Like the way they sidelined the only pregnant doll they ever made, the unrealistic beauty expectations they put in front of young girls, all the controversies they'd had over the years, etc., while also profiting off that criticism in the film, acting like it was praiseworthy that someone was calling them out for this stuff. As good as the Barbie movie is, it is also, whether we feel an emotional connection to it or not, a giant toy advertisement. And with these cheeky playful winks at the camera and the gentle but persistent slapping of Mattel's wrist throughout the runtime, it felt very much like a giant corporation pointing and wagging their fingers at themselves with one hand while patting themselves on the back with the other for doing so, and all the while getting paid handsomely to indulge in this. Again, not really any of the film team's fault, it's very much a criticism I can level at a lot of things these days. I felt very similarly about the way Netflix told itself off with the first 2 episodes of the most recent Black Mirror season, and I don't know how you do a Barbie movie that criticizes these things without falling into that trap, but it is there, and it's still a cognitive dissonance that takes me out of the movie a bit. I also just didn't really like Will Ferrell in this. Everyone else is doing an excellent job, and I'm not sure if it's Ferrell's fault or the character he's been given, but also I thought that some of his dialogue, well delivered as jokes that were quite funny, kind of muddied the waters of what the movie was trying to say. It's impossible to really articulate my thoughts on this without massive spoilers, and honestly, kind of a nitpick, so I'm not really going to get into it because frankly, this isn't the important part of this video. Algorithmically, it probably makes more sense for me to have just released the previous 2 extended sentiments as their own long-form focused videos, but that's not really what I'm trying to talk about here. If this is a review of anything, if you can even call it a review, it's not so much a review of Oppenheimer or Barbie, as much as it is a review of the experience of going to watch 2 films like this so drastically different on the same opening day with an engaged crowd. When I went to the cinema, I saw the very first screening I could of Oppenheimer at 11 in the morning, and even in my small corner of England, where even for new Marvel movies I never have to book a seat in advance for prime time slots, I arrived to find that there was literally only a few seats left across both films for an 11 AM and 2:30 PM showing. I went into Oppenheimer and sat with a gripped crowd, the booming sound design literally shaking my seat in the dark, and left with a sense of harrowing dread having been taken in by the film's closing sentiment. I then was immediately cheered up when, as I left the screening, a significant portion of the crowd that exited with me followed me straight into an even bigger screen across the aisle to be greeted by a completely different crowd, an excited, bubbling mass of infinite pink and tie-dye costumes already filling the auditorium before us. That's an experience you will never get on streaming. I went from this pensive, quiet world to one filled with contagious joy, and through the experience of seeing both films back to back, both with completely different crowds, I joined everyone around me in this almost communal sense of a wide range of emotions. Tension became drama, became sadness, became horror. Amusement became laughter, became melancholy, became joy. And call me pretentious or silly or like the human version of that Nicole Kidman AMC ad all you want for giving such a profound sense of weight to the pairing of an arguably self-indulgent biopic and a big toy ad, but I genuinely remember coming out of the experience and just reflecting on that, on the different feel of the films and the crowd, on the different emotions that ran through my mind and the people around me as the films unfolded, on getting the privilege of losing myself into two wildly different stories from wildly different directors doing wildly different things, and just thinking, wow, movies are amazing. Both these films are good on their own, but for me, together, paired with the electric atmosphere of the invested crowds, they in that moment represented a perfect singular metaphor for the hugely diverse scope of what movies are capable of the range of stories different voices in this world were capable of telling. It felt like I just went into this cozy, safe, familiar and welcoming home and then microdosed the whole gamut of human emotion. And if Barbenheimer on opening day is capable of that, what a perfect little contained representation of the diversity and power this medium can achieve. And to me, that's not just a meme. That's cinema. Cinema that, if I may add, as one last final sentiment before finishing this video, cinema that was crafted by people, talented crews and talented writers and talented actors. Crews, actors and writers and talent that, for the wide variety of experience they offer us across film and television and for the way they enliven almost every day of our lives, deserve more recognition and compensation than they are getting when those at the top reap the benefits of their successes without sharing even 1% of the generated wealth. Obviously, I'm not just talking about Barbie and Oppenheimer more, I'm talking about the union strikes currently ongoing across this industry, and I just want to remind you that if you came to this video and in any way remotely relate to the feelings I have described in it, be that for the films I featured here or for any story that's ever meant anything to you, then just remember who created that thing you love so much. It wasn't the studios, it was the actors, writers, and crew they hired. So as a final parting message before the video ends, I just want to say that I support the strikes, and if you've ever loved a movie or TV show, then you should too. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Big things coming up on the channel soon, like really big. I can't talk about it properly just yet, but hopefully I can soon, so make sure you keep an eye on that by subscribing to my OnlyDans and clicking the red button below and hitting that bell so you don't miss a thing. If you've enjoyed this video, then please drop a like as it helps it get seen by more people, and comment with your thoughts. I'm keen to hear what people thought of both of these movies. Did anyone do the double bill? How was it for you? I'm genuinely interested in hearing what you thought. Other than that, I would also just like to thank all of my patrons you're seeing on screen right now who make these videos possible, and remind you that you guys can become a patron too and get access to a bunch of exclusives at the link in the description below, which goes a long way in supporting the channel. Special thanks this video to my patrons Virago, Robin Hildebrand, and Bearded Axe Models. See you all next time.